Hello, everyone. Welcome to Writing Quest. My name is Brendan Pugh, and today we have Katee Stein with us. She is a Canadian author, and she has a new book coming out in September called Earthbound. How are you? Welcome to the show.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, of course. So, tell us a little bit about you. So, how'd you get started in this? You've published a few books already, got a few coming out. So, kind of give us that whole journey.
Yeah, distinctly, right?
The
The short
the
version.
easy answer, whatever that
Yeah,
is.
yeah. I think the easy answer is like most writers, this has been a lifelong sort of passion, loving books, whatever, like so that whole history was there. It was back, I think around 2016, 2017, I started kind of like picking up my writing again, wanting to finish this novel I had an idea for. But it wasn't until like 2018 that I kind of got challenged by, I'm an education assistant by trades, working with kids with kind of special needs and exceptionalities. But one of the students that was just in one of the classes I was working in, she like finished a novel, like this huge novel. And she's like, yeah, I finished writing my book. And I was like, what? How did you do that? So it was just like a bit of a kick in the shorts where it's like, the one days don't ever come until you make it like a today project and it's gonna, commit yourself to it. And so that was the start for me, and that was in 2018. So I committed. I was like, I'm finishing this book. Like it needs to happen. And then from there, I think it unlocked something for me where I was just like, this is legitimately what I want to do. This is what I want to spend my time doing. And so it's just been a process of, I finished the first book was Glass Helix. It's a YA dystopian romance. Finished writing that, went into the query trenches for a good year. Had some good ups and downs, an offer that didn't quite pan out. So put that aside, started drafting Earthbound, came back round, rewrote Glass Helix. Oh, at the first I didn't write it as a YA, then it came back, wrote it as a YA, queried it again, got picked up. So the last few years have just been lots of drafting and querying and putting books out. Glass Helix came out last fall through Stag Beetle Books. So that was a really amazing process, and just kind of walking through, like getting to finally, it felt like kind of like stepping behind the curtain, right? Like you could finally go, okay, like now how do I actually get this book in people's hands? So walking through that process with them, and then kind of having the aha moment. I had queried Earthbound. Again, same thing, kind of ups and downs. And it was just sitting on the shelf. And I thought, you know what? I'm going to do this. So choosing to then indie publish and just jump right in because I wanted to tackle it all. And yeah, which leads me to like this fall, Earthbound's coming out.
Yeah, that's awesome. And Earthbound is kind of a fantasy, so it's a little different than the sci-fi dystopian. So
Yeah.
any reason for that, or you just had the idea for it and,
I think it comes down to like the idea for it. But also like I've had people mention this about my sci-fi. They're like, "Oh, your sci-fi has a bit of like a fantasy feel, like lean to it." And now Earthbound is like a fantasy with a bit of a sci-fi feel. I think my sweet spot really is a science fantasy sort of storyteller.
Mhm.
Um, but that's not always a genre that we like. Like, what is like
Yeah.
we know that there's crossover in the genre. Everybody wants to kind of pin it down a little more specifically, but I truly think like Earthbound is probably can fit in high fantasy and is got that science fantasy lean. So they're just both genres that I adore and
Yeah.
love and I'm inspired by. So I just pick and choose.
Yeah. Very cool. So Glass Helix is kind of more traditionally published,
Hmm.
whereas Earthbound is going to be indie published. So can you talk a little bit about maybe the differences of that and maybe the what you've seen as like pros and cons to both sides of that?
Yeah, I think, like when I first finished my draft, like I think like a lot of people, we go like, okay, now I'm just going to get it published, So I started looking into traditional publishing, and especially because I was daunted by marketing and putting myself out there and, all of that side of it of like trying to like find readership. I was really very focused on getting traditionally published because that was just, it felt like everything else felt too much. And I was like, I
Sure.
just want to write. So, and then, you finding Stag Beetle Books, they're great, small press, the cost isn't on you,
Mhm.
so I have everybody at my disposal and cover and editing and everything's kind of like you just walked through the process. So For a debut, I felt like that was actually really helpful for me. And I think if you can partner with the right publisher, it can be a really positive experience. So it was that for me. It was great. And then the flip side is for indie, I think I was seeing the limitations of like how I could market, how I could, like just brand thing. Like there's just more creative control with it as an indie, particularly being like, because I'm from Canada and I'm trying to market in slightly different ways or to slightly different audiences and want that broader approach. It's not just Amazon. So some of that stuff is a little bit tricky when you're shipping from the States and, just simple things like that. And it's like all
Yeah.
of a sudden my costs are going up. And so being able to like do it for myself just gives me a lot more freedom to like put it into bookstores here and find the indie bookstores, and work out something that's mutually beneficial for us, where I feel like I'm a lot more limited just because of dollars and cents with Glass Helix. So
Yeah.
That was like a big part of it. And I think because I had gone through the process already, it gave me courage that I was like, okay, like you're going to be marketing no matter what. So
Yeah.
you got to get over yourself there a little bit. And then just to jump in and tackle it. And I've actually really found it a very satisfying process. I'm really enjoying putting a book together. It's not just a story together. It's putting a whole product together. And that's, that's fun.
That is fun. Yeah, it seems like marketing seems to always be daunting to people the most. But I think what it is, I don't know if it's so much the marketing stuff. I think it's the putting yourself out there.
Absolutely.
It's really tough at first. And I think, like even starting a YouTube channel, I very quickly was like, what are people going to think? Like you just have that moment. And I think that's the hardest, like once you can get over that hurdle of, I'm out in the world now. I think it slowly gets easier and,
Absolutely. Because you're like, I mean, the first time you video, like, how old am I? The first time you videotaped yourself.
Yeah.
But like the first time you're on camera or whatever and you see yourself, there's always that like, that's what I look like, whatever, those sort of insecurities. But like you said, I think it's just like the freedom that I found is like people don't always necessarily want the perfectly curated thing. They just want something authentic and real. And I'm like, I can just be me. Like I can do that. And if you don't want just a facade, then I'm your girl.
Yeah.
I can do that part of it. So I think my comfort level increased as I realized that I didn't need to be a certain thing. Like I could just be myself.
Yeah. And I think that indie publishing that's one of I think a really great benefit of that is obviously you can't fool yourself. You still have to put out something that's good, but you can just lean into being yourself and you can write the stories you want to write and not feel like you have to, like, I would rather have, like that 1,000 people that are super dedicated and just fans as opposed to, millions of lukewarm sort of kind of people. You know what I mean?
100%. 100%. Yeah. Like, and recognizing that there's the opportunity to kind of niche that way. I think in indie publishing, which I really love, like the fact that this book, doesn't fit necessarily like a perfect little fantasy genre bubble. I'm not really worried because I know, like, I believe in the story and I know that I think people are going to resonate with it and then they're not really going to care where it gets categorized, right?
Yeah.
Whereas I think, obviously with traditional, they have to think about that stuff because they're trying to just sell on a large scale.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. Well, and I think too, when you jump out into the world, what I've found, especially since I started doing interviews, is like 99% of people are super nice.
Yeah.
Like there's no like, you have this fear that like you're going to jump out there and everyone's going to just like rip you apart and be really mean. And no, most people are super chill and nice. I even doing YouTube, I learned that a lot of like, you get so many comments that are like, love what you're doing or it's great or whatever. And then you get that one comment who's like, this video sucks. And you're like, come on,
Yeah, you kind of get to that point where you just give it a shrug and a laugh. And I mean, you see a bit of that obviously with, reviews and stuff, but typically I just try to avoid those spaces. I don't really feel like they're for me anyway. So they're for the readers. So I just leave them to them. They can hash it out over there.
Yeah, for sure. So Why don't you tell us a few of, so you've got the sci-fi and you've got the fantasy. Why don't you tell us maybe some of your influences? Like what are some books or authors or things that you like maybe read as a kid or read now that are really
Yeah.
influential in what you do?
Yeah, I mean, like you could do the whole progression, you know. Loved Bill Pete. I don't know if it's a Canadian thing. Did you ever read Bill Pete kids books?
Mm-mm.
They're like, okay. If you ever get a chance to just look up, they're picture books, but they're like weird. Like he
Yeah.
just has like bizarro ideas and I just loved them as a kid.
Yeah.
So I think right off the bat, it wasn't like I wasn't reading kind of just traditional little stories. They were like fantasy.
Yeah.
Um, and I love that. Obviously, C.S. Lewis. I remember
Mm.
I was given the Lord of the Rings trilogy for Christmas one year. Had no idea. My parents are like, my family, science fiction is just not on their radar at all.
Right.
But they picked this book up, you know, this trilogy up for me, and I finished it through the Christmas break and was obsessed with Lord of the Rings for like forever.
Yeah.
So
And
like
and
early
probably
on,
still
those were,
are.
yeah,
That's me. Yeah.
absolutely. Yeah, last night I was just sitting in my house thinking, I'm like, oh, I just want to watch The Fellowship of the Ring. You know, like
Yeah.
it just comes back. You just, anyway. So yeah, like, you know, pretty classic sort of influences when I was younger. Um, Recently, I think I came to like all of these trains really late. Found Rothfuss probably 5 or 6 years ago, and is still like one of my all-time favorite writers. Like, I'm just so inspired by how beautiful his prose is. Like the way that he tells a story is just, I don't know. I think it's beautiful. I know people
Mm.
get upset at him, but I really like
Yeah.
him. Ironically, I read Brandon Sanderson after I drafted Earthbound, and then I was like, crap, because we have kind of similar themes as Stormlight in terms of like oaths. And then, so I went through an existential crisis and then thought, oh, what the heck? It doesn't matter. You know, like it's a different story. But I read one of his books and then had to read, you know, virtually almost all of them. And so
Yeah.
he's been a huge influence just in terms of like, I think I was daunted writing a fantasy book because I think there's such a dedicated fan base and I just didn't know if I could live up to
Yeah.
expectation, you know, like there was the kind
Sure.
of that weight of like, I don't know if I'll get in trouble. I just feel like Sanderson's very accessible. Like I know
Mm.
that some of his books are really big and daunting that way, but I think the way that he builds a world can feel, to me, it felt really like, oh, let's just come on into the world. Let's figure it out. Instead
Yeah.
of a more Tolkien-esque sort of like,
Well,
you know,
his
ponderous working
prose
out.
is very easy to read.
Yes.
It's not, I've been reading. I'm about halfway through the Wheel of Time. Part of the reason it's taking me so long is because I actually don't like the prose. So like I
Yes.
love the story, I love the characters, I love everything about it. The prose is really hard for me.
Yeah.
So that I like that about Brandon Sanderson too, because and specifically Robert Jordan's prose, because I know Sanderson finished that series. But um yeah, but I agree. I'm just reading Tress of the Emerald Sea, and it's just so like light and easy to breathe. Yeah, love it.
Yeah. Yeah. It just pulls you through. And I like, that's something that I definitely want in my books. Like, I just want people to be able to pick up, fall into the world, and be able to, they're very character centric stories. So it's just like, just let me pull you along. Like, let's
Hmm.
just go, you know? So I definitely feel seeing that in the genre has really like, it's freed me a little bit to just go, okay, yeah, I'm going to do this kind of the way I want to do it.
Yeah. I think Sanderson too is. I haven't read all of his books. Confession, I've actually not read Mistborn yet. I just
It's
haven't got there.
okay.
Um,
No shame. There's no shame.
yeah, it's on the list. It's in the pile. I just haven't
Yeah.
got there. I'm a
Yeah.
slow reader, so like the Stormlight books take me a long time to get through,
And the big. Yeah.
and I kind of split it. Like if I read a big book, then I kind of like I need a small book in the middle to kind of break it up.
Yeah.
Um, but I think what he has done for a lot of authors is just really shown like what you can do as far as your author business and also the
Hmm.
stories you can tell. I mean,
Yeah.
he's just cranking out books. I mean, obviously he has a team and like I get all that, but
Yeah.
but at the same token, he's also using that platform to push forward like new avenues for authors and fight for, better systems and all that kind of stuff. So,
Yeah, absolutely. I
yeah.
think, you know, like seeing his Kickstarter was like pretty inspiring for a lot of authors where we're just like, because, you know, traditional publishing can be, we always talk about the gatekeepers, right? And if you can, like, how do you
Yeah.
get through? How do you get in? How do you get seen? Like, But the idea that you could gain an audience, write
Hmm.
books that people like, and if you have an audience, there may be a platform for you to kind of move forward in some way that's,
Hmm.
I think, more sustainable for people. I am really excited watching fellow authors launch that way and stuff. It's
Yeah.
cool.
Well, that's, I think, the great thing about how we, our society now is we have social media, which has its drawbacks, of course,
Hmm.
but it allows anyone to build an audience, and
Yeah.
anyone you're direct to consumer, direct to
Yeah.
reader. And so that was kind of, again, part of doing the YouTube channel, is just being able to be like, I don't have a book published yet, but I can build an audience while I'm working on that.
Yeah.
And,
It's brilliant.
like, so yeah, I think it's a great time to be indie and do all that stuff.
Well, and like you're saying with your, like this platform that you have, that people are also invested in you as a storyteller. I think I
Mhm.
just love that sort of play, how it starts compiling, right? And then we see bookstagrammers that are also, authors that are also like, I just think it's kind of neat how you can pick which avenues are working for you and really lean into them.
Yeah, for sure. So let's talk about your writing process. So, are you a pantser? Are you a plotter? Are you a little bit of both? How do you kind of go about an idea and
Yeah.
turning it into a book?
Good question. So obviously, right there, you know that I'm not a plotter. It's like, how do I do it? No, I think part of what really hung me up in the beginning was I wanted to be a plotter, and
Hmm.
to me, it always felt like the right way. Like, yeah, figure out all the things and then write, and that continually shut me down, and I just could not gain any sort of momentum or traction with my writing that way. So for me, it was a lot of just letting go of like the expectation of like what I thought writing should look like, and just start writing the story. And so I truly am a discovery writer. I generally start with a seed character, like a seed idea for a character. And I feel like I'm often like, okay, where does this character belong? And where does this world, like trying to mix and match what story is going to fit with which character. And I feel like if you can really flesh out a character, and again, this isn't, I don't write this stuff down. I call it like, I like percolating, right? Like I just think about it. I don't know. I have lots of post-it notes. I count those. I just got walls of post-it notes. But to me, it's like if you can have a well fleshed out character and you understand who they are as a person, what they want, where they, are headed, what's driving them, and then you can put them in a world, whatever conflicts are coming their way, it starts to like almost drive itself.
Hmm.
And I love being surprised. I love rounding the bend and going, snap, like that's not where I thought this was going at all. And
Hmm.
um yeah. So I think the process for me is like whenever I like some and I still fall back into like, oh, I need to figure this out first and not write. And inevitably the answer to that is just sit down and start writing. And it's usually
Yeah.
garbly-gook at first, as I'm typing
Yeah.
away, but it starts the juices flowing and we get moving.
Yeah. That's such an interesting feature of, I suppose, creativity in general, but I think writing, like, you're just writing along, and of course it's all coming from you. Like, it's
Hmm.
all in your brain, and it's all coming from your brain. But your characters at times can just really feel alive. So it feels like your character is telling you where the story
Yeah.
goes. And
Yeah.
then you hit those moments where you write something and you go, huh, I didn't know that character was going to do that. But also you created it.
Yeah.
Like it's like a weird loop
It
that
is.
it's so strange.
Like an inception moment or something where you're like,
Yeah.
whoa. It
Yeah.
does happen like that though. And I think when you try to talk to non-writers, non-creatives, and you're like, yeah, like it just totally got away from me or whatever, you make a comment like that, they
Mhm.
can kind of look at you like you're leaning into some sort of like spooky,
Mhm.
ideas. But I think that's the cool thing is that I have this like little mantra sort of thing that I read before I write sometimes. And one of the things it talks about is giving the characters the dignity of autonomy, like
Mhm.
that they can like actually make choices that I wouldn't make because I'm giving them the ability to be their own person.
Mhm.
And I think so that's really important to me that I'm not like being prescriptive in my characters or my stories, right? Like I'm not here to tell anybody anything about life other than just to explore worlds and society or whatever you're exploring in your story thematically,
Yeah.
but through the lens of this character. And it's important to me that they have their own kind of morality and sense of right and wrong and where they're going. Like they need that to feel real, I think.
Yeah. Do you find at times it's tough to, I know this was like this for me at first when I started writing, but like, do you find at times it's tough to, I don't want to say it, write a character that is not like you, like not like
Yeah.
your morals or your,
Hmm.
like write someone totally different to what,
Yes,
yeah, I find it very
absolutely.
tough.
Yeah, I think, and I think that was much more an exploration for me in Earthbound than it was in Glass Helix. Like that's a little bit more classic. Like we know the villain, and there's a little bit of gray, but it's pretty. We know our heroes, and everybody stays on their track. Earthbound, things are a lot more gray. There's
Mm,
like all sorts of things, and there's choices going on in that story. We're like, ooh, and it's actually part of the tension because I think there's choices being made that should make you go, really? You're going to do
mhm.
that? So that is challenging though. And I think for me, it's always like, I just want to like have everybody happy.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh, here's my nice little characters, my nice little story. And then you realize it's like, oh yeah, this
There's
isn't
like
going that
no
way.
conflict at all, like
Yeah,
between, yeah,
I know there would be no story if
right.
I actually just wrote to my comfort level. There'd be no story. We'd be
Yeah,
sitting in a park having a picnic, but
yeah,
we get a few picnic scenes, but that's about it. The rest of it is just all of that tension of watching them make choices and deal with situations that I hope I'm never in.
yeah,
It's just truly,
yeah.
I don't want to be there.
It's almost like weirdly coming to, it's like, so I like when you write a character at first, I feel like you're kind of writing the idealized version of like if they
Yeah.
made all the right choices. And then,
Yes.
so it's
Yeah.
almost like this weird, you have to come to terms with the fact that like you also make wrong choices just in
Yeah.
your life as a person. And
Yeah.
so being like vulnerable enough with your writing
Yeah.
to accept that like I make wrong choices, so my characters need to make wrong
Yeah.
choices. And
I totally think you're hitting on something there too. That's exactly it. It's vulnerability. And I think you have to be brave to write things that are messy. You
mhm,
know what I mean? Like if we want our stories to be interesting, I think we have to be able to lean into the fact that that means that things aren't perfect and we don't, if we had all perfect characters facing, you know, situations that we knew how they were going to get through, it takes
mhm,
all of the sort of intrigue and interest out of it. So to find those more interesting stories, we have to be willing to write a little bit more brave, I think.
yeah,
Yeah.
definitely. Do so for like magic systems and stuff. So you wrote a, let me think how to say this. We'll say game mechanics. So like the
Yeah.
mechanics of how things work. So there's
Yeah.
the Lord of the Rings version, which is kind of the soft magic. Yeah, we don't really know how it works. It just Gandalf can do a few things and that's it. And then
Hmm.
you have the Sanderson version, which is all the rules and everything. Do you find, first off, I don't know if you have a soft or hard magic system. I
Hmm.
find if I'm just kind of discovery writing, but I don't know how that magic system works or how the piece of world building works, or like if you're on a planet, how the planet works, that like I know the story, but the mechanics of things sometimes trip me up and then I get stuck.
Yeah.
Does that happen to you? And then how do you work through that?
Yeah, it definitely did. Like I knew I had a really strong idea of this magic system, but I didn't know all the rules. And so that was definitely fleshed out in all the drafting, like in all the subsequent and then eventually I actually went and wrote the Book of Oaths, which is like
Hmm.
their law. And so I've been
Yeah.
writing the law
Right.
for their, so, so now I can go back and reference my own sort of rules that we're following here and stuff.
Right.
But that's getting fleshed out kind of more and more. And now like I'm just nearing the end of book 2 with it. And you know, it's funny because that seed of an idea, you're like, oh, this is much bigger. It's just grown over time, but I think it's happened fairly organically. But that's why I wanted to have book 2 pretty much done by the time book 1 came out, because if I needed to retrofit these sort
Hmm.
of like structural stuff, yeah, I wanted to be able to do that really, so that I wasn't trying to like patch it in with, hand waving later sort of thing. So the magic system in Earthbound was inspired by so kind of random and obscure, but are you familiar with the story of Samson, the old Bible story? So, he's a big, strong guy. And the whole basis of it was this like vow that they talk about. I think it's called like the Nazarite vow or whatever. So, he couldn't cut his hair and he couldn't do certain things. And because of that, as long as he followed those rules, he had power and he was like superhuman strong.
Yeah.
And I just found that fascinating. I just thought that was so interesting, because he wasn't really a moral character. Like he did some really terrible things in those stories.
Mm.
And then, as a kid, when I would hear it, it always sounded like he was the hero because in the end, he's the hero. But, when you look at it closer, I'm like, oh, this guy's kind of something a little gritty about his story that I was kind of intrigued by. So I thought I wanted to play with a magic system that wasn't linked to necessarily a moral code. It was linked to an adherence to this kind of set of laws and rules. And so the whole sort of society is set up around this religious order and this sort of mysticism of like, okay, well, if you swear an oath, you get power from the sky and, like this is how it all works. And so I guess it would lean a little bit more hard, just because it has these set structures, but it's not terribly complicated. It's not Sanderson-esque like that way. I'm like, don't have that sort of, you need all the list of medals and everything at the end of the book to really understand it. It's not like that, but there is very structured sort of way that the power is manipulated.
Yeah. I like magic systems that I probably lean more towards. I like hard magic systems and that I like figuring out the rules and how it works and all that. But I always want to leave a little spot for some soft magic of like, you don't quite understand. Because I think that adds just a little more intrigue. Like you want to, not enough that it frustrates the reader of like, well, this doesn't make any sense. But just enough that it's like, I think that's why like Gandalf is a great character because he'll just do something. You're like that's, like it just.
You pulled that out of nowhere.
Yeah. Like it just adds this level of like, because, for the most part, he seems like this unassuming old wizard guy. And then he like fights the Balrog and you're like, whoa, So I think having that little element of like, it's not really explained really works.
Yeah, I hope so because I lean into that a lot.
Yeah.
Because, like the whole thing is this is a very secret order. So we just like we start off just knowing that something is like one of the characters doesn't have power anymore and we don't know why. And so it's like kind of the slow unfolding of like what's happening, what's the larger politics, what's at play. And that's part of like hopefully what pulls people forward is like trying to figure out, okay, what's actually going on here. And then hopefully in book 2, bringing that home and with a satisfying sort of ending.
Well, I think it leans into like as a human, we're always learning. So even if you're like the best in your field or the top of your field, there's still always something to learn. And so I think for me anyways, it feels like it just leans into that of I'm really good at this thing, but there's still something I don't know. And so I don't know.
Yeah. Which isn't that the best part about writing? Like, I love the idea of craftsmanship. It's not just like a skill. Like, obviously there's skill involved, but the process of becoming more and more a master of your craft is like such a inspiring thought to me because it's not about being perfect any one step of the way. It's that, like you said, it's being willing to like continue to learn and explore and create and push yourself forward, I think.
Yeah, definitely. So Earthbound's going to be a duology, yes? So after that, do you have more things in this world you want to explore, like different things, or you want to have something else you want to totally move on to?
Yeah, there's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Because like, the further you go into a world, you're like, oh, well, I've got this whole kind of expanded world now that you can kind of play in, really. I don't know. I'm not going to close the door on it for sure. I think there's more to explore in it. I haven't planned anything yet. After I finish drafting the sequel, Skysworn, I'm moving on to a more science fiction sort of novel that's been bugging me for a couple of years. It needs to be written. So I'm going to do that next and then maybe come around. So yeah.
Do you like switching between the two a little bit? Does it help like keep refreshed on ideas? And
yeah, that's kind of how it set itself up, actually, like with, more science fiction and then more fantasy. I would say, like, as much as I like probably read more fantasy novels early on, I landed in more science fiction kind of through my 20s and 30s that was just kind of like where I was at. I really love the genre. So in some ways that feels like home. Fantasy feels like more of a risk for me. But I love it equally. I don't know how to
Yeah.
really say it, but yeah, I think going back and forth, especially because they do kind of borrow from one another. It's just how you explain it that ends up kind of defining if is this magic, is this science, what's driving this world. But yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I think when Star Wars came out, it really officially kind of blurred the lines of that because that's a sci-fi fantasy, so it's
Hmm.
space and science, but also wizards and magic. So I
Absolutely.
I think once that happened, now it's just kind of this blended, you know, thing. You never
Hmm.
really know what side something's on, I guess.
And that's probably when you were talking about influences earlier, like that's probably the largest one I left out. Like Star Wars is part of our family to the point where it's all the art we have on our walls. It's all, like we're there. And so that's such a huge, huge influence. Even if you're not borrowing like, I haven't written anything in space yet,
Yeah.
but so even though I'm not in space, I actually comp Earthbound to The Mandalorian a little bit because it's like
Hmm.
you took like one of those planet side adventures where he's like stuck on a planet and now we're gonna go do
Yeah.
some stuff. And
Yeah.
that sort of mix of like high and low tech, like where they can
Hmm.
have like these really gritty little outposts and places, and it doesn't, they're cooking over a fire, but then they pull out their data pad and do their
Yeah.
stuff. Like it's that sort of mix
Yeah.
of technology.
I always tell people when even if you don't like Star Wars, even if you've never seen Star Wars, for Star Wars fans, even if they don't like George Lucas,
Mm-hmm.
there's no one can deny the contribution that he made to storytelling, movie making, like the whole with both the sequel or the originals and the prequels. Like he redefined movie making twice and like
Mm-hmm.
the technology that we all use. But
Yeah,
then like when Stars came out in 77, how the story was told, the editing, the pace of it, like I mean it redefined everything. So I'm like, even
yeah,
if you don't have to like Star Wars, but you do have to recognize its impact on everything.
absolutely. Yeah, and then have you read any of Timothy Zahn?
I
So
haven't read the Heir to the Empire stuff for years, but
yeah,
love it.
I fell into that, and then I think I've read. I can't say all of that what he's written, but I've read a lot of what he's written, and as like just fun sci-fi, that guy definitely is up there for me. I just love it,
Yeah.
and his Thrawn series that he did,
Yeah.
Thrawn, and what was the other one? Whatever
Yeah,
it's called.
it was like two trilogies or something. Yeah.
Yeah, I read them both. I can't remember the names. Fantastic.
We my older brother has all of the books from the Legend, now what's called Legends stuff.
Yes, yeah.
So when we were growing up, like when I was in first, second, third grade, like I was just read he would go we'd go to we had a little store called Ben Franklin that we'd go and get like, $6 and you could get the next paperback or whatever. And so I read those. That's like all I read for a long
Yeah.
time.
Yeah. And there's something like so comforting about just, again, kind of landing in a world that even if you're with new characters, you're like, I understand this universe. I just want to be, I love that. And there's so much variance because you have a whole universe to run around in.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, I love those books.
Yeah. They're awesome. So, speaking of movies and stuff, Lord of the Rings, we talked about that a few times. How do you feel about adaptations, and would you ever let someone adapt any of your stories?
Man, that's always like, oops, sorry, I'm picking things here. Yeah, that's the million dollar question too, right? Like it's just like, I I have such a love for good storytelling through movies, and I think they can be done well. And so absolutely. I think I would be there. I would just hope that I had enough, I don't know what exactly goes into making sure that you have a say on a movie.
Yeah.
Because I mean, one of the like the worst adaptations of all time I think was the Aragon movie. Did you
Oh, yeah.
ever right? Like we
It's
all just
so
agree
bad.
that was it's so bad.
They put feathers on a dragon. Like, come
It
on.
just and they weren't even like, with some of the casting, I wasn't even mad. You know, like Jeremy
Mhm.
Irons, like that was like, there was some good casting in that movie, and it just, oh my
Yeah.
goodness, the writing was terrible. It was so bad. Um,
And to
so
be
I don't
honest,
want that.
it's not even hard story to adapt. Like it's fairly straightforward.
Yeah.
You know, like
Like they
I was
changed things that didn't need to be changed. It,
yeah.
like that, when that came out, I was just like, that's what not to do. And then I think often we see that, like, oh, that was okay. And then we see, you know, really good adaptations in my mind, like Lord of the Rings,
Mm,
what Peter Jackson did originally with them. That's amazing. And I think to be able to share it in a way that, you know, brings it to a larger audience, and in such a, like, when we can see something, when we can, like, that just helps immerse us even more in the world. And all of a sudden we, like, you know, when we imagine Aragon, I'm thinking of Vigo, you know, like,
yeah.
there is no other,
That
like
yeah,
that
he is
is
that.
Aragorn now, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, so I think it's a super powerful medium. I would absolutely love to see it. When I write, I am a very visual, like, I feel like it plays out like a movie in my head. I see it, I hear it, and then I can write it, sort of thing. I actually have an audiobook being produced right now, and
That's
so last night I got the final scenes, the final chapters, and the impact of, like, actually hearing your words
mhm,
and the story, but from somebody else, like, it's outside of me, right? Like, I've read this story, I don't know how many times, but to hear it
mhm.
and hear these voices and everything kind of come to life, and it hits the way you want,
Yeah.
that
That's
was
cool.
such a wild moment. I was just freaking out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was
That's
really, really cool.
that's super cool. Yeah, I think I so if you watch I'm sure you've watched some of the the behind the scenes of Lord of the Rings and stuff.
Yeah.
Um there's a I don't know what part of it is, but they're interviewing Peter Jackson and he says something to the effect of, we didn't want any of our own stuff in this. We wanted to create Tolkien's Lord of the Rings. Like they wanted to be as close and as they wanted to tell his story, not have their own. And
Yeah.
I think that, like, for me, I'd have to make sure I found someone like that. Like, obviously, things have to change. They can't be like, you can't straight adapt a book over to a movie. But
Yeah.
it's that you hear a lot of creators. I hear this in Star Wars sometimes when you hear them do interviews. You hear this in a couple of things where they're talking about, like, we want to take what George Lucas did, but like totally redo it. And to me, that, like, I
Yeah.
guess I understand what they're trying to say, but
Hmm.
you have to honor what it originally was, if that makes
Yeah,
sense.
absolutely. And I think, I mean, Star Wars is a perfect example of this, because it's at the point now where it's so big and so sprawling that people are like, I think it's separate a little bit, where they're like, oh yeah, we can do our own thing with this. But then they're surprised when the fan base disconnects and they're like, no. And I think that is probably one of the single biggest things, is if you've lost the original vision, you've lost the original, like, you're going to lose at least a portion. You might gain some new ones. It's not that it's invalid, but I think you shouldn't
Yeah.
be shocked when you lose, you know, kind of viewership or readership, if you've just totally
Yeah.
departed from what the first concept was that
Yeah.
drew everybody to it.
Yeah, that's I think the one that was the most recent for me that so George Lucas had very specific, like, this is what the Force is. He had a
Hmm.
very clear definition of what it was. And now they're kind of trying to redefine it. And I think that's
Hmm.
where they're losing people, because it's like,
Yeah.
you could still keep the original definition he created and create a cool story, but yeah, it's like that you're just walking away from what he made,
Yeah.
and
Yeah. And then I mean, obviously it's still Star Wars, but I think it's like, okay, what are the things that are, like, fundamental to this world? And, you know, if you're talking about having your own book adapted, that's absolutely it. Like, of course, most of us probably won't get a 3-movie sort
yeah,
of, like, sprawling epic type of thing, storytelling. But, you know, if it ever was made into a movie, does it have the same heart? You know, do the
yeah,
characters face the same sort of challenges and conflicts as they move forward and have their own same arc? I think those are the things that really matter. If, you know, the color of the trees is different, well, nobody's really going to
right,
get too bent out of shape about that sort of stuff. But I think when you lose that heart, that's when you get people up in arms.
yeah, yeah. Well, and I
Dangerous
love,
territory.
yeah. Well, and who knows, we might get in trouble for even talking about it, because
Yeah.
everyone's very loves it. But
Yes.
Sanderson, he did talked about something recently too, where he's like, "Oh yeah, Hollywood's been knocking on his door for quite a while
Mhm.
now," but he is kind of in this great place of like, he's like, "I don't need their money, and I want to make sure they do it right." So he's like in that perfect zone of
Yeah,
he can protect his work and not give it to anyone until he's like very
happy with
sure
it.
that that's going to be the right way to go.
Yeah. And like a story like that, you get nervous because
Yeah,
I would be like, I'm nervous. As soon as you said that, I'm like, ooh, I've got butterflies. Like,
yeah,
I can't imagine seeing like some of these characters that I loved. You just, they need to be done justice. Like
yeah. Well,
I am
gosh,
that
and
sort of
each
fan. I get a little weird about that stuff.
yeah, I get real protective. Like every
Yeah.
time I hear what just something got announced and they're like, "We're gonna make this movie," and I was like, "Oh, geez," like I
I
just was
know.
like, "Please don't."
Yes.
Yeah,
Yes, that was them bringing Thrawn into the Star Wars universe for me because I had read all of Timothy
yeah,
Zahn's books and stuff. And the way that he fleshes out that character, you're like, you feel like you know this guy and how he's going to be. And I have
yeah,
feelings about it.
yeah.
You know,
I
how he was brought into it's
yeah,
like, it's a whole write off, but it is not the character that I knew. And I think
yeah,
that is just always a hard thing as like when you're on the reader viewer side of things, we get so attached to these characters. They
hmm
mean something to us, right? So
yeah,
yeah, it's kind of fun.
yeah, definitely. So we've talked a little bit about some longer series like Sanderson and all that. Do you have any ambitions to write a series that would be that long, like a huge 10 book something crazy?
No, I that's where I think like it's funny as I so the world of Earthbound is called the Mercurial. So the more I'm in the Mercurial, I'm like, oh, there's more I could do here. But the idea of like just one stretching story, I don't know if that really caters to how I write.
Hmm.
So for me, I'm just kind of taking it a book at a time or a book or two at a time. A duology felt doable to me because it was too much of a story to put into one. Trilogy, I was like, yeah, I don't
Yeah.
know. That middle book kind of freaked me out a little bit. So I was like,
Hmm.
I'd rather just no, I think I can do it in two. So yeah, we'll see. I don't know. My goal is to continually learn and grow. So who knows where, we'll lead, but I don't have any big grand plans. Like I know some people have worlds and they've got it mapped out and I'm like, kudos to you guys. I think it's
Yeah.
incredible. But it's not really my process. So I'm just tackling a book at a time. Yeah.
Middle books or middle stories in general, whether it's a movie or a book or whatever, it's like they have the potential to be the worst, but they also
Hmm.
have the potential to be the best. Like there's
Yes.
some that
Yeah.
are like, I think Two Towers, like I think most people think the Two Towers movie might be the weakest of the three, but
Hmm.
I love it. Like it's one of my
Yes, it's
favorites.
awesome.
So
Yeah,
yeah.
because it's kind of so complete in and of itself almost, right? Like it does bridge that gap, but you get a full story there with Helm's Deep and everything, right? Like yeah, I agree. It's a good one.
I think the
Yeah.
danger is the danger is generally with the first book, or you end up like this, you establish the world. It's like this is
Hmm.
here's the parameters. But that second book, then most authors really start like expanding and adding all these things. And so I think that I feel like that happened with like Harry Potter and Chamber of Secrets. Like all of a sudden it really just expanded.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where you can either lose people there, like if you do, if they don't like what you did or whatever,
Hmm.
or you can really sell them on, hey, this is a bigger,
Yeah.
cooler world.
Yeah. I felt like it was a knife's edge where it really could go either way. And I don't try to write with that sort of like those voices in my head anyway, like you try
Hmm.
to get like, okay, what are people going to think? You can't really draft well, I think, from there, but obviously it sneaks in. And so I just didn't want to put extra pressure on. I was like, well, if I tackle a trilogy in the future, I'm feeling really brave.
Right, right. That's fun. It's fun. Well, this has been great. We're kind of coming up on an hour, but I kind of like to always end with asking this question. So, what if you could give someone advice who's either just starting to publish or just starting to write? What would be maybe like two or three of your like big takeaways of like these would do these things?
Yeah. I think really more than anything is you have to learn what works for you. And there's so much advice and there's so much stuff out there. If you're like a person that needs to like research everything and figure it out that way, great. If you're a person that just needs to sit down and write pages and make a mess of things, great. Like, I think the beauty of being human is that we're all created so uniquely. The way that you're going to process and walk through it all is going to be your own. And we can obviously learn from all the people that have gone before us and from, reading good books and taking it all in. But I think sometimes that can be a crutch. And we're like, well, I don't know enough, so I can't start, or I don't do it quite right yet, so I can't start. And it's like, if you've got a book in you, it's really uncomfortable.
Yeah.
For it to not come out. Like, they want to come out. So I think just finding that courage to start and figure out what is yours and your process, and be okay if it's different from other people's process. There's no, lesser or greater way of writing a book. We have great examples on kind of every different side of things, whether you're plotting or pantsing or whatever, So I think it's always going to take courage. The vulnerability in it is undeniable, but I think from my experience, man, like, it opened my world, because I was like, this is something I had always wanted to do. And I had those books sitting in me, but I was just like, I just never believed I could. Thankfully we grow up and we heal and move forward, and stuff. And then you go, oh, wait,
Yeah.
And I just feel like I feel like I've stepped into my truest sort of purpose for being here, and it's not that they're like earth-shattering stories, but we can offer people a moment to, whether it's like to rest or to escape or to be challenged or whatever, through a story. I just think that's such a gift. So don't rob yourself of that because you're too afraid to start.
Mm-hmm.
And I think find your people in it. And because I think writing alone is a really hard prospect. I think we all start there, like, it is a solitary endeavor as you start. But again, it takes courage to kind of reach out and build community and take that risk and let somebody read your work and find those people that are going to be your people. Not everybody's going to be, and that's okay. It doesn't mean that your work isn't valuable. But I think the idea of trying to like slog through all the ups and downs on your own is never a good idea.
Yeah.
Take a friend.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
Very fun. Very good. Well, where can we find you? Social media, all that kind of stuff. Where's all that at?
Yeah, so I'm primarily on Instagram. So definitely, it's just Katee Stein on Insta. I have a little bit of a thing going over on TikTok, same name. You can find me on my website. I'll be kicking around quite a bit over the next sort of month, and I guess that's kind of where
All right.
my books are in all the normal book places. Yeah.
Yeah, for sure. Well, and I'll get it in the bookstore once this one comes out too, so we'll have it down there. Yeah.
To have it on the table with some of those other guys, that's going to be pretty cool.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't got them all read, so I need to. My list is so huge right now. It's crazy,
and it just always grows, right? I'm like,
yeah.
I'm finding all these fellow Canadians recently. Actually, I was just like, we kind of did a bunch of pointing at each other and the other day, and I'm like, my goodness, it just jumped by probably 5 or 6 different books I need to read.
Yeah, totally. Cool. Well, this has been great. We'll put all that stuff down in the description, and so that'll all be linked up there. And so just really great that you're on the show and had a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you so much, Brendan. This has been awesome.
Yeah. So thanks, everyone, for watching. My name is Brendan Pugh. This has been Katee Stein, and we will see you next time.